I'm Shaka Satori. Happy Mother's Day to all. Um, I have the honor to bring up this keynote. And in bringing up this keynote, I'm reminded of my first glimpse of the Grand Canyon about 30 years ago. I'm driving up through these winding tree-lined roads, and I come around a curve, and between two trees, I caught a glimpse of what I can only describe as a glimpse of God, that Grand Canyon. My heart jolted to such a degree that I literally pulled over. I had to make sure I wasn't having a heart attack, and then I had to cross the street and get a full glimpse of what I had seen.
Yes.
That never happened to me again until around 2007 at a Black Consciousness Conference held at Cal State Long Beach. The who's who of Black scholarship was in the lineup, and I mean everybody. But when I heard this man speak, I knew who my revolutionary father was meant to be. He was and is the most total package of conscious Black manhood I have ever known. Humble enough to stay at my home and gracious enough to invite me to stay at his. His Black masculinity, cultural consciousness, revolutionary African-centered spirituality, knowledge of self as an individual and as a people is balanced with a demonstrated importance of family, nature, health and fitness, all wrapped around a core of impeccable character. He's been a revolutionary activist and a warrior scholar since 1960, before I was born. The author of 5 amazing books, The Art of Leadership Volume 2, Return to the African Mother Principles of Male and Female Equality, The Integration Trap, The Generation Gap, and The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. He's one of the greatest organizers produced by the Civil Rights Movement, and that's not my opinion. The visionary leader that he is, he's been the professor of emeritus at San Francisco State University, where he taught for 38 years and was chair of the Black Studies Department. He's one of the principal architects of the African-centered education movement, period, no matter what school you go to. He collaborated on strategy with both Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He worked with the Deacons of Defense. Both his warriorship and his scholarship have been field tested many times over. From his work as the chairman of the San Francisco division of C.O.R.E, the Congress of Racial Equality, and leading up to the work that he does now currently with his Per Ankh Amilcar Cabral Ella Baker Leadership Organizers Institute. I present to you, so he can get it going, Brother Obati Shaka.
Thank you, Brother Shaka Santori. We got 2 Shakas here. That was a nice introduction. Thank you. I want to greet C.O.R.E Unity Center of African Spiritual Science. And I've had the honor to speak before you a number of times. It's been a big honor for me. And on Mother's Day, this is a very appropriate topic, the divine feminine. And I want to formally extend my condolences. I have privately, but formally, to Pastor Erica Bird on the transition of her husband, Mary C.O.R.E, Richard Bird, beautiful team, both of them. And Mary C.O.R.E had a great spirit. And I think that spirit allowed for some intergenerational connection in your church. But both of them mirror African-centered values, both of them strong. And I understand now you got 2 Leo women playing a leadership role in C.O.R.E Unity Center for African Spiritual Science. I would appreciate that, being a Leo man. That ain't no joke. Neither one of those sisters is a joke, you know what I mean? So you got some real strong sisters up in there who practice what they preach. So, and Sister Erica Bird, I love her. She knows it. And great spirit. Both are dear to me, and I'm sorry to see that the brother passed on. The topic for today, the divine feminine, is an appropriate topic, obviously, because this is Mother's Day, but it's a very appropriate topic because all human beings are divine, and of course, African people are divine. Divinity resides within us, which is God, and certainly the feminine is divine. And it's the cooperation of these two, masculine and feminine, that are key to universal harmony, along with a number of other things. So the divine feminine is an expression of God's superlative light. That's a term I've given to God. Superlative comes from the Yoruba definition of God, one with superlative character, Ola Damari. The light comes from my own experience with the light. I usually speak from experience or from piping into God's mind. That's my best stuff. And if you hear me quoting God, I give you quotes and you're going to hear it today. That comes directly from God. No joke. I have no reason to play with that. We all have sufficiently large egos that, you know, we're proud of what we do. And so if I do something, and even though spirits may have come through me, it's not direct, then I'll say, this is something I've come up with. But if God has visited me, you're going to hear me saying that. It don't happen too often. And it's big time, meaning the insights that you get from God's mind. So the divine feminine is an expression of God's superlative light because God is a great light. That's what God is. And the masculine and feminine are the components in the universe and human beings necessary for the expression of God's light. And the creation of the human is the only one of God's creations that God can communicate with directly. We're interlocutors with God. And if we did our role right, the planet would be in good shape. Had we not lost our power, it might still be. Our task now is to restore it to a just order. Am I right? So I've seen this beautiful superlative light that is God. And as a warrior scholar, and now as a spirit scholar warrior, this light was revealed to me after a time of crisis, lifelong crisis, which is crisis occurs in life because you have issues unresolved. And so I had some issues unresolved with the feminine principle. And so after going through a period of 5 years, 3 months, a year of introspection, looking at myself and working on the feminine principle within me, I began to create a greater balance. And as I created that greater balance, I began to write the most important thing I've done in my life, which Shaka Santori referred to, the book Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, that Dr. Obenga says is a classic. And the term that I use for families, he said, should be in the dictionary. I'll go into that in a minute. And so after a year and a half of internal reflection, 3 months a year for 5 years, camping out and looking at myself, I'm an astrologer, so I know some of the internal imbalances that I have. And I knew that the feminine one was definitely one I needed to work on. So after 15 months of that, I began to write the Mother Principle and wrote 180 pages. And then I asked God, what was the meaning of just societies? And when I asked that question, I knew I was in trouble. I should have already had the answer because I had been dealing with Dogon philosophy and should have known it. And so one night, out of humility, not expecting to get any answer, I asked God, what was the basis for the just societies of Africa? I didn't expect to get an answer. And I should point out, generally, God speaks to us when we're humble, generally when we've gone through enough to be prepared for the answer and when we're deserving. And I think generally, God's not going to give answers on big questions if God knows they're not going to be used for the good of humanity. And so when I asked this question, what was the basis for just societies of Africa? The answer came back, and I'm quoting, this comes from God, the just societies of Africa, God didn't say this part, were societies where, and this is what God said, quote, all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society, period, end of quote. That comes from God. And with me, my communication's telepathic. I don't hear any speech. It's without speech. Spirits in heaven generally don't talk, except for some great spirits on this earth plane who actually can go to heaven and actually get that FaceTime and actually hear speech. People like the great healer among the Lakota people, Fool's Crow. He's actually had that experience, and others have. Not me. I'm not on that level. So God told me what the formula was. Just societies were based on balance between males and females, one not having more power than the other. God didn't tell me who those people were. God knew I'd know. God talks to you on your level. And so I instantly knew that was the Chwa, who created the most just societies on the planet Earth. Some people call pygmies or Anu people, the founders of Kemet. I knew that, but I didn't know the formula, neither have any others who have studied Chwa societies. They ain't figured out that formula. And because Chwas have been removed from human history, there's no connection of the Chwa to ancient African history in a systematic, cultural, philosophical, political, social, economic way. They are not. They're left out. They're put in anthropology. And yet a C.O.R.E was Chwa, Anu, from which name they derived their name from his title, Ani, A-N-I, is the source for Anu, meaning great ones. But they themselves call themselves pure people. So from this formula for just societies of male and female balance, I formulated the term twin lineal families, meaning that we are all descended from male and female lines, not singular lines, not matriarchal female, not patriarchal male. These twin lines of descent symbolize twin lines of male-female power. They are also linked to masculine-feminine principles that reside within each human being and within the cosmos. Masculine-feminine principles mirror the cosmos that's made up of masculine-feminine forces, such as the sun, that is reflective of the masculine, the moon, that is reflective of the feminine, and these work inside of all of us. Sirius B, in Dogon philosophy, is a planet of the masculine. Emenya, the companion star, Emmeya, the feminine star that astrophysicists in the West debate, but the Dogon are clear about. So for the human being, the requirement is for us to work at the highest level of balance that we can. It's necessary for us to synthesize, not balance, synthesize masculine and feminine energy. Why not balance? If you balance it, there'll be no sexual definition if they're equal. So it's got to be more of one than the other, more of the masculine for the male, more of the feminine for the female. So the masculine predominates for the male, the feminine predominates for the female. And this usually means, therefore, that males are going to have to work more on the feminine side. Females may have to work more on the masculine side. Sisters may argue that because sisters demonstrate, as we get into the discussion of the construction of femaleness or Black womanism, we'll see that they evoke a lot of strength. So they may figure that they don't need to work on this as much. Well, we'll see. And then each side has got their imbalances within their own. Feminine has got their imbalances, masculine has got their imbalances. So this is a constant struggle that we never get just right. So for the Dogon, and this was my model when I went on retreats, because I spent years working with the Dogon system and then going into Kemet, Yoruba, other systems. And so I had worked years of reworking my thought pattern, my philosophy, my attitude pattern, my communication and behavior pattern, so that I didn't know I was preparing for this life crisis. But that's what really carried me through. And the model that comes from the Dogon that really carried me through is what's called the seventh pneumo. And in the Dogon system, pneumo, N-U-M-M-O, are words, but they are like netters. They represent principles of nature. And the seventh pneumo is like the pneumo that symbolizes perfection. Now, this is an African conception of perfection, because the West, the conception would be freedom from fault. But the Dogon, and I think many Africans have the same conception of perfection, it is the synthesis of the masculine and the feminine. And the seventh pneumo, the number 7, which we know in African-American culture, represents many things. Malcolm X was the 7th child. It's supposed to be the lucky child. The Hoochie Coochie Man in the blues is the 7th child born on the 7th month of the 7th day, when the 7 doctors say, born with good luck. Can't you see? I got not $800, $700. Don't you mess with me. Hoochie Coochie Man. Y'all know what that means. Some of you younger ones may not. That means a ladies' man, ultimate ladies' man. No man wants a hoochie coochie man around his woman. Let me tell you. But 7 is the mixture of 4, which is feminine, the 4 feminine genitalia. 3 is a masculine, the 3 masculine or male genitalia. The 7th pneumo embodies both. That is considered perfection. George Washington Carver used to say that he would create by making the abstract simple. That's what happens when you get synthesis. You're able to take what's invisible, bring it down to earth, and make it walk and talk. You hear me? That's the ultimate thing about synthesis. When you get that synthesis going, we never get it perfect. We're always working on it. So to know the divine feminine principle that resides inside of all of us requires self-cultivation work. That's work where you're cleansing yourself internally, because if you're going to be able to communicate with God, you got to be pure enough to do that. And George Washington Carver could do it all the time because he was a near pure spirit. The Twa could do it all the time. It's the only civilization of people that lived in oneness with God, not Kemet, not the Yoruba, not the Asante, because they had no power struggles. They had no interest in one ruling over the other. They had no leaders. They had no concept of God that was part negative, part positive. It was all positive because basically they were. So we won't get to that level. But if we can clean ourselves up enough internally through self-cultivation, then we can get closer to the state that the Kemites call Jeruma, G-E-R-U-M-A-A, self-mastered person. We'll never be fully self-mastered. Only God is, but we'll get better at it. So in my pursuit of masculine feminine synthesis, I had to come to know and better understand the feminine side of my being, the side I was weak on. I was good at fighting. I was good at driving terror into my enemies' hearts. My father was a master of that. He fought with brass knuckles. He refused to fight in World War II as my model of manhood. He was both a ladies' man, a man's man, did not play around. If you saw my mother, you'd see why. Prettier than pretty itself, and took no mess. Leo woman, by the way. We had a lot in common, her and I. You know what I mean? She is a poet. I try to be. I just composed a poem for my wife for Mother's Day rather than give her a card. You know what I mean? But my mother was a poet, but my sister's a master poet. My whole family's full of poets. You know what I mean? But my father had a poetry with his fist, but he'd always warn you first. Buddy, don't do that. He'd give a warning the first time. The second time, he'd knock you out. And if you were using the N-word, he'd just knock you out. My father's very light complexion, so some people thought he was white. And then when he's cold, he'd say, I'm one of them, buddy. That was my father, you know what I mean? But my mother, she was the embodiment of this feminine principle of, of feminine energy and strong at the same time. So in my pursuit of the masculine feminine synthesis, I had to come to know and better understand the feminine side of my being. And that was my weak side. And that meant I had to learn how to draw from my sensitive, intuitional, nurturing, higher mind, feminine side. Now, I'm an astrologer. My moon is in Pisces and my 8th house. You don't know what that means, but that's the life, death, regeneration house. The moon is the feminine principle. In Pisces, that's idealism, very opposite of Leo. You know what I mean? So that was really what I was working on when I went through crisis, this ideal model of the feminine. That was my problem. It wasn't that I messed with sisters. I idolized them too much, put them too much on a pedestal, you know what I mean? So that I was blind to faults, including the faults that it wasn't a fault, but a weakness of my wife. She had no control over, delusional, the delusional state. I couldn't see it because I didn't want to see it, because I'm dealing with rose-colored glasses. You know what I mean? Only did that with sisters. Had the FBI sent sisters on me, if it was sexual, they would have never got anywhere. But if they were working on other levels, it might have worked. It might have worked. The brothers, I was always clear on them. You know what I mean? In a minute. You know what I mean? So I was blind on this. So I'm using myself as an example, but I'll be using others as well to explain how this works for the male. But at the same time, I'll be speaking to the divine feminine, the construction of feminine identity among Black women in this country. And I'm going to really run it past you sisters, see what you think. Because I know you're going to put a critical eye to this one. Yeah, you know what I mean? So that was the most rewarding side of this experience, was to experience the feminine, but through a very painful process. And so Dogon philosophy provided me with the basis for that. And then my looking at the women in my life, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and the big mamas in my life. You know, we had big mamas. That's a part of the Queen Mother tradition that we've carried. Those big mamas had a big influence on me. So this required, in my internal work, drawing from the divine feminine as well as the masculine, and drawing from the union of the terrestrial, which is what we have here, and the celestial, which is what's on earth. So this drawing from the mothers in my life, and it's interesting, I didn't draw that much on my father, and I'm doing that more now, was the terrestrial part. And these high principles coming from the Dogon and the Chua, and then from the beautiful light, that's the celestial part. And so all of this came out of drawing from a society that had achieved male-female balance. And this is real key, the Chua. No other people have that in their history. Now, the Chua are everywhere in the world, so they're the beginning of every people's history. But once you move past the Chua, that is usually the imprint, but you're moving somewhere else, usually on the zone of patriarchy. So drawing from these two realms, the terrestrial earth and the celestial heaven, and I'm a political person, so that's quite a draw, enable me to try and pipe into these energies that are cosmic. Sirius B, Eminya, and by the way, the Dogon argues Sirius B is the source of the Big Bang. It's the beginning of the cosmos. And Eminya is the complementary star that rotates in harmony with it. So over many years, Dogon philosophy and the philosophy, and I really want to stress this, of the spiritual blues. Check out my shows on that subject. I have a number of them on Dr. Obitashaka's show, because you really can't apply Africa unless you apply it to your New African, what I call New African or African American reality. And the philosophy of the spiritual blues provided that basis. And the best rendition of that is provided in Lerone Bennett's Negro Mood, his masterwork. Anybody up there read it? Raise your hand if you have. Hardly no one has. Even our best scholars, even when I told them, they didn't go read it. It's his best work. I know he told me, you know? And so that really provides a grounding for the philosophy of the New African, that is the African in the United States. So part of my work in working on synthesizing the masculine and the feminine was the reconditioning of a either or Platonic Puritan thought pattern, good or bad. Too many of us are locked into that. If you look at what's happening right now in Ukraine, that's a good or bad picture. It ain't that way on the ground. You know what I mean? Nothing is that way. And so embracing a both and philosophy, where instead of good is separate from bad, you know, in our culture, bad is good. Internalizing that, you know what I mean? Instead of separating the spirituals from the blues, internalizing the fact that the spirituals are the blues. And in fact, the blues live up inside the spirituals. It's not just that they developed as an art form in the 20th century, they were lying inside of the spirituals in enslavement. Why? Because the spirituals were not really about, very rarely, Jesus, because Blacks weren't Christians. And most often, not even about God. They were sometimes, but they were most about freedom. And they were about code words for how to get us to heaven, which was away from chains and slavery and mutilation and all the rest of this stuff. So the internalization of that thought pattern was really key for me to begin to think in a twin way, which I call cosmic logic, twin logic, which is what African philosophy is based on. If you look at the Dogon, the Kemites, it's called Djeba, D-J-E-B-A, which is the union of Asar and Ra. And so it's the idea that life is slow dying, that's Asar, and death is a rebirth to a new life, which is Ra. And so it's this union. So Africans think this way. New Africans, when their heads are grounded right, think this way too. They don't think of life as separate from death. Life is slow dying. Native Americans say, get to know your friend death. He sits on your shoulder, you know? And when you do, you have a greater appreciation of life, and you don't have a fear of death. In fact, you don't have a fear at all. So African women and men carried a spirit-based culture into the Western Hemisphere with the belief, the deep belief that divinity resides within each of us. I should stress this with Black Christians. One of the things that separates the average Black Christian from white or Muslim or Judaic practitioner is the knowledge that God resides within them. That's a big difference, because in all those other systems, God's outside of you. That's your African heritage, but that's reality. No matter what you believe, God's inside of you. But if you know it, you're empowered with that knowledge and you'll draw from it. So this endowed our people with a great sense of internal power. When we see the rise of suicide rates now among 7 to 11-year-olds, there's an absence of a sense that they have something within them that they can draw from. They're sinking into a choice, what God told me is a choice between two cultures where it's either or, it's good or bad, and a material culture. And if they don't see things around them that are promising, they can think about checking out. The highest suicide rate among young people in this country is now between 7 and 11-year-old Blacks, and our suicide rates are the lowest in this country among all groups. You hear me? The fact that that's happening means something is going on seriously wrong, and I know what it is. I'm not going into that right now, but I'm simply saying that when you have this sense that you've got the power inside of yourself, I don't care how bad a situation is, you know you can turn it around. So in the United States, Africans constructed a new African culture. I call it New African. And we created an art form. Europeans in this country have no art form. And it consisted of many elements, mostly African, some new in this society. And of course, we were deluged with external influences that were negative. But largely, we created a new African culture. And it drew on a lot of principles. The most important were these twin lineal principles that I'm talking about that reside in Black families. This idea of Africans having to have a say-so in everything they do, which is the basis of the male-female balance. That's the birth of democracy. We gave birth to it, not the Greeks. Democracy is opposed to Aryan culture. They're into arbitrary power. Whoever has it, wields it. That's it. Anything democratic, they will manipulate a vote and get their results. And if you don't think so, look at what's happening right now. Trump is manipulating the votes to get that dummy back into the White House. You hear me? And so basic to the Black person is you got to have a say-so in everything. That's why it's so hard for us to organize. But when we do, we're bad. So we carried from Africa certain grounding principles that make up this new African culture: spirit, extended family community, humanism, and others that I'm not going into here. So in the formation of new African culture, Africans in the US formed a new African ethos. Some people tell me ethos doesn't matter. Yeah, that's only because you haven't really looked at yours. I'm married to a lady from Barbados, born in the UK. She just came back from Barbados, all suntan, looking good. We're getting ready to go out for Mother's Day as soon as this is over. Met her doing political work in the UK. Stayed in her home. See, that's part of serving your people. Every now and then you get something wrapped up nice. But I knew what I was looking for. My laundry list was so long that my mother said, I'm not so sure you're going to be able to fill that one. And I found somebody that filled it. We're sitting on the porch one day in the courting period, because she'd come from London, stay here. I'd go there and stay with her, blah, blah. And she made this comment: the African in America has an ethos distinct from all Africans in the world. That told me two things. One, I got a real smart woman. That was one of the top requirements for a woman. Smart. Got to have a lot of brain power. You know what I mean? Good character. That's the other thing. Spiritually grounded. You have to agree with me. You could be a Christian as long as you ain't no holy roller one and want to roll me into it. You know what I mean? It's okay. You know what I mean? And so when she said that, I said, oh. And then I started thinking, what's our ethos? That wasn't hard to figure out. And she was not putting us down, because the African in the Caribbean has an ethos that's African. Why? Because African culture and African people dropped in the Caribbean, 98%, nothing but African. So what else is going to be? But here we had to struggle to recreate a culture, because they were doing everything to take it out. And for those of you that buy that they took our culture out, you truly have been programmed. Because even dogs have a culture. You can't take the culture out of a dog. You hear me? It might be a mixed breed culture. It might be a fierce culture. It might be a wolf culture. That's the best one. You understand? But it's got a culture. But you run around here talking about you ain't got no culture. That is one of the worst arguments you can make. Culture is your way of life and designed for living. Culture is subliminal. Culture is like your mama. It's so deep, you don't even know all of it. My mama would tell me stuff about me in my 60s, late 70s, that I thought I knew that I didn't know, just like as a matter of fact. Oh, by the way, you know, you're like this. Oh, I said, oh, really? That's what culture is. So the thing is, in our creation of culture here, because of the attack it came under, we just couldn't continue it automatically. That's why it's New Africa. We had to recreate it. And in doing it, we drew on certain Central African principles, brought in some new ones, and then had to fight against external forces. And so what did that lead to? It led to an ethos, a way of being, a way of carrying ourselves that makes us unique among Africans in the world. So what is the ethos of the African in America? It should be clear. Every other African in the world knows it. We're the only ones that sometimes act like we don't. Your ethos, the ethos in Kemet was Ma'at. Why? They built up a civilization they tried to base on justice. So that's what it was. The ethos of the Yoruba is C.O.R.E. That is the pursuit of your destiny. That's their ethos. And it's bad. And by the way, the African in America would go to Babalaos or diviners to find out. If I try and escape, will I get away? They tell you they were going for another reason. That was why. If I try and slit my master's throat, a bunch of us rise up, will it work? That's what they were really asking. They tell you they're trying to avoid a whipping. That was more than that. But for us, in our effort to recreate culture, what it did for us is create an ethos of creativity. The African in America is the most creative African on the planet. If you don't know it, check out your byword. We have a saying in our culture, I would rather be the worst innovator than the best imitator. We don't like imitation. You hear me? And when we train a novice to be a master, fine, we want them to go off or her to go off on their own and find their own voice. Our mantra is we don't like to do the same thing the same way twice. Am I telling the truth? I'm a strategist, never lost a battle. I am never going to come at you the same way twice. Shaka Centauri is a martial artist, so am I. And you know that in martial arts too. That's why I like Kung Fu. He's in Kung Fu. Chole foot. I like the angles because they can't see you when you're coming at an angle. I'm a strategist. First, before everything, I'm a strategist, baby. Strategy is the ultimate art of prettiness. Clean your opponent's clock out, and then they're eaten out of your hand because that's the goal of a strategist. But by being creative, you're the most creative people on the planet. Your culture is the culture of popular choice of the whole planet. Kemet had the greatest civilization in the world. You got the popular culture and civilization in the world and don't even know it. Wake up, Black folks. See the power inside yourself. You hear me? We can make something out of nearly nothing and make it look good. We can make ugliness pretty. That's us. You hear me? Some of us are just pure ugly now. Some of us, you know what I mean? We're going to have to deal with that. So the thing is, at every turning point in our culture, note, just like the Kemites would go back to Sep-Tepi, which would be the first occasion, which was the noon, the watery mass, they would go back to that. And every time we have a turning point in our culture, we go back to the first occasion, we go inside ourselves, and we come up with something new. That's what we did when we created the spiritual blues, the foundation of our art form, the most complex and beautiful on the planet. And that's what we did when we kicked off the Black freedom movement in the South, the Montgomery bus boycott. 97% of Black people doing the same thing at the same time. 97% of white people have never done the same thing at the same time in their whole wide history. Do you get that? It's hard to get us to do that, but when we do it, we really do it. You hear me? So one of our new creations rested on the New African Cultural Foundation of New African Womanhood. You hear me? And New African Manhood, formed out of the fire of oppression. So we brought into it the mix of Africa, but then it was new stuff that we came up with in America. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the distinct qualities and philosophies of Black womanhood, qualities that Black women have had to have the courage to express, qualities that are expressions of the ethos of Black womanhood. Now, we got one of Black manhood. I'm just going to deal with the woman thing. You know what I mean? Now, you sisters are more qualified than me, and you're going to have more to say about it than I will. But I hope you get something out of this coming from a man. But this is a man that has a great deal of respect for Black women and the feminine inside of myself. So a key feature of Black sensibilities of Black humanity expressed by our enslaved ancestors was this feature. This is a common feature that the people who talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome miss, because we have the Willie Lynch belief, which is pure bull. Willie Lynch ain't real. If a white boy did come up with that, his last name wouldn't have been Lynch. They weren't in fact lynching you then. And in fact, it's Manu Ampin that wrote the book that proved that Willie Lynch was BS, a hoax. He even profiled the guy who wrote it. He could tell by his language. And the guy came forward on the internet and admitted it. But we have an investment in Willie Lynch. We want to believe we got lynched in slavery. Our people were too smart for that. And they had too much culture to be able to fall for that. So what is it that most whites said about Blacks? Let's just talk about the external observation of enslaved Blacks by whites during enslavement. What did they say? They have a sense of nobility of character and bearing, a sense of nobility. By the way, Zora Neale Hurston, our great anthropologist, said this: the closer to slavery you get, the more African we were. The noblest Africans were the ones coming out of slavery, and the noblest ones were those enslaved, because they were the closest to Africa. You hear me? So this sense of noble bearing, my generation wouldn't go out of the house without looking clean. You hear me? If they're going to work, they clean. If they're a janitor, they're going to work, and you think they own the bank that they were cleaning up in. That's the nobility of character. They ain't faking it. You hear me? They clean all the time. My wife has that same attitude. She's younger than me, but she's 66. She got the old spirit, and she's clean all the time. So am I. You know what I mean? It's a nobility of character. It's an expression of that. But those who've misread us, are Black psychologists who have misread slavery, say that's imitating the master. The master wasn't clean. What you talking about? Because you dressed up. No. And if you're looking at the zoot suit was an expression of African apparel. You know, that was that African thing that came out of jazz musicians. You hear me? So the thing is, nobility of character and of bearing is key in the culture. In the Caribbean, they call these poor great. Poor materially, great in the sense of their being. And that's the average Black person. That's why Carter G. Woodson pointed out that the founders of Black businesses, the creations of institutions, the creations of our culture, they were usually everyday Black folks who hadn't been brainwashed enough not to believe in themselves. They had that nobility, that sense of empowerment. So this was also expressed in the carriage of our people. the way we walk. And by the way, John Henry Clark would talk about how in Harlem in the 30s, Black people were broke, and all you could do to date a woman was walk up and down the street. Well, if you saw the nines that people had on, Kwame Nkrumah, with his nearly perfect teeth, taking a sister out, all he could do is buy her an ice cream cone. But walking and looking cool, that was enough. You hear me? That's nobility, baby. You hear me? Huh? And the most noble Blacks is everyday Black folks. And who sets the fashion industry in this country? It's everyday Black folks. You hear me? I am into looking sharp. I'm always looking at what the brothers and sisters wearing. And the jazz and blues musicians, they're the sharpest. You hear me? Huh? Now, I'm not into some of it because I like to wear my crowns. I'm not waiting for heaven to get a crown because you ain't getting no crown in heaven. Wear it on earth. You're a light in heaven. You need no crown. You know what I mean? So the quality of nobility was an expression of the kingly, queenly societies we came out of. And then the quality of democracy, you got to have your mouth on everything. That comes out of the democracy that's key to Black folks. You hear me? Those two qualities. And that comes straight out of hunter-gatherer societies and then classless age-grade society. Notice I'm grounding stuff when I make spiritual stuff. I'm giving you historical reference here. You know what I mean? So the conceptions of Black humanity were an expression of a sense of Black empowerment, and it is especially strong in the expression of Black womanism. The central qualities of Black womanhood, expressions of the divine feminine, we need to understand, are a mixture of masculine and feminine energies, with the feminine predominating for sisters. Now, above all else, in the twin lineal context of African families and male-female balance coming out of Chwa societies, these features were passed on and carried by Africans into the Western Hemisphere, including the United States. Now, here's the key thing when I talk about the construction of African and African-American womanhood. This applies for all African women, wherever they are. See, when I make this kind of statement here, I gotta be right because the sisters ain't gonna accept it if it ain't. And what's the essence of it? To be a woman is to be equal. That is the core of it, equal. And in hunter-gatherer societies, that's exactly what they were. And then in classless age-grade societies, societies without kings and queens, the first ones tended to be ruled more by women. They inclined towards women. And then later you get more male-female balance, and then you get an inclination more towards males. But the essence of the construction of Black womanhood in this country and around the world, because here I'm making a general statement for everybody, and I'll get specific to the African woman in America, is the essence of Black womanhood, African womanhood, globally, is equal. Whether they're in an equal status or not, that's what drives them. You hear me? They know that's the way it should be. And if they got wrong-headed Black men that don't accept it, that's what they got to deal with. You hear me? And we got plenty of wrong-headed ones that don't, and we got some who do. You hear me? So equal is like the key to this. And then, of course, the synthesis of masculine and feminine qualities is a part of the whole thing. So what are some of these qualities that I would define as central to Black womanhood? Check these out. One, a sense of towering strength expressed, among other things, through a deep sense of spirituality. Black women are endowed with this sense of empowering strength. This is a key cardinal principle of Black womanhood. Black womanhood rejects the white feminine notion of feigning or faking fragility or weakness. You know, I'm a lady, you know what I mean? Sisters generally don't accept that. Now, I know sisters who look that way, meaning they're frail and physical makeup. And they will tell you in a minute, I'm not frail in spirit. And you'll know as soon as you hear them. My wife being one of them. Just because I'm little, that don't mean nothing. I already knew that because one of my qualities was strong. I can't have nobody that just, I don't know where you're standing on something. And of course, it makes it interesting. It's like seasoned food in a relationship. It keeps it interesting. But so Black woman by nature in the construction of Black womanhood was no conception of feigning fragility, because fragility is the product of patriarchy, white patriarchy, where women are made useless. They're objects that are subject to the will of men and generally stripped of just about everything and put in the B category. You know what that word is, the B category, which some of our foolish men have embraced and some women have. I've heard some women say, they're B, just because you come out of the ghetto, hard life, and you had to fight, that don't make you a B. That makes you a tough woman. You had to fight hard to be what you are. That don't make you no B. You know what I mean? So that is a Pandora's definition. The woman all endowed that men should want, but treat her like she's a danger to them, giving birth to children that they fear when they should love them, especially female children, which they don't want. Black womanism combines strength with ladylike qualities, including poised, soulful, graceful, manners of expression, and carriage. The Black woman's walk is a sight to see, as the Black man's is. It's kind of like an announcement of the presence of the female in the world. You hear me? Now, there are different types of sisters that will manifest this in different types of ways. You know what I mean? Johnny Lee Hooker sings about a certain type. You understand? There are different types, but the point is, it's all Black femininity. Yeah, the professional type, the pretty type, the cutie pie. It's all different types. But the fact of the matter is, it's strength with some real graceful femininity. I have to go to no school to put a book on your head to figure out how to do this. It's all balanced and in the right place, but it is saying what's on the inside. Black womanism has no fear of being silenced. You don't hear Black women saying, I need to have a voice. Why? First of all, we come out of a culture of a voice, the word. The word is central in our culture. And then what's key to that word? The righteous word. And who is the one that teaches the righteous word? The mother. You hear me? Instills this in us. And so the sister is endowed with voice, loud voice. Haven't you noticed? Not all, some are quiet. But the quiet ones, you need to listen when they talk because they're usually the observant ones. And this is true for men too, because we're not all extroverts. And the introvert is going to let you know what's important when it's important. They're usually silent. They're observing. And that's usually the self-mastered person, male or female. They're not talking a lot anyway. You know what I mean? So womanhood, Black womanhood, is about voice. It's about authoritative communication that demands respect. That's a Black woman. Black womanism, contrary to this fragility and smallness that has been defined as white fragility, Black womanism deplores gossip. They don't gossip. Now, I'm not saying no women gossip, but I'm saying Black womanism deplores it. And when you're looking at a real Black woman, that doesn't even come across their mind. You hear me? And the sense of having excessive self-indulgence. They don't need that either, you know? Have enough is fine, but going overboard is not necessary because it's an insecurity in expressing either your womanhood or your manhood. And I'm not knocking people having something, or dressing nice or having a nice car, a nice house. But going to excess, Black womanism doesn't express that. Black womanism draws from this well of the feminine that has a deep emotional bond, but that emotional bond is tied to a deep well of intuition of the higher mind. Now, a key quality of Black womanism that's tied to the assertion of dignity that is expressed in Black women like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Ella Baker. According to Sister Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, this is the point she makes about the Black woman. Now, this in Black womanism is most important. Quote, Black women hold the key to social transformation. Black women believe that and know that. And if you look at key social movements, you're going to see their key role in it. Doesn't mean men aren't playing a role. But I'm sitting on the floor outside of Bogalusa, Louisiana, 1965 with the Deacons. My girlfriend has just brought me a nickel-plated 38 Smith & Wesson Bank of America special, Virginia Burton. She led the chapter of C.O.R.E in Berkeley. She was a Leo. Went all the way from Berkeley to bring her man a gun and a whole lot of bullets. And we're laying on the floor waiting for the Klan. And what's the Deacons telling me? The Deacons was an armed self-defense group in the South. The FBI could never get anything on the Deacons because they didn't gossip either. They were true Black men. You hear me? And what did the men tell me? This ain't in no book. It was the sisters that told the brothers to pick up the gun and defend themselves, not just in the Black church, but in the Black movement. When I was leading demonstrations in Bogalusa, Louisiana against the Klan, the Deacons were on my side. I had my 38 on my side and, clean as, you could possibly be. And sisters right up in there smiling. You hear me? Huh? If you checked out Ella Baker, when a white boy who happened to be the son of the chief of police called her the N-word, she knocked him out. Now, this is a teenager. And when she went home, her family patted her on the head and encouraged her to do more of it. Black womanhood. Don't get the point that I'm saying Black men don't fight. I'm just saying that key to social transformation. Who was it that triggered the Montgomery bus boycott? These qualities of the divine feminine, and there are many more, I'm not claiming this is all of them, because see, our culture is complex, so therefore the concepts of manhood and womanhood that we live, they're going to be complex, beautiful, and powerful. These qualities of the Black feminine I found expressed in women in my life, and I'm going to give a few examples and then conclude this. My grandmother, Catherine Filardi, my great-grandmother, Sylvia Brown, my mother, Sylvia Bradley, and the mother of the San Francisco Freedom Movement, which was the key to the only effective freedom movement in the North, which I happened to lead, but it was through her. These women I want to use as examples of the manifestation of the divine or the divinity in the Black feminism. The first was Catherine Filardi, my grandmother. If you read the book, The Mother Principle, it's dedicated to her. She has a Queen Mother's crown on. I'll show it to you later. This woman had 7 children, including my mother. She was Black as midnight, every bit as pretty, and proud of every inch of her Blackness. My great-grandmother, Sylvia Brown, who was one tough Black woman out of Mississippi, said when she watched her daughter, my grandmother, walk, she would say, "Look at her. She walks like she owns the world. And she hasn't got a pot to pee in and a window to throw it out." That was my grandmother. That's the stride of Black women. You hear me? And that stride could also shake a whole lot of men up. You hear me? She was one fine lady in her day. You hear me? My grandmother had a sense of self-determination, Black pride, and Black self-love. at a time when few blacks could get an education. You had 2 years of college, but could only work for the most part in white people's kitchens. But when a job opportunity opened up that didn't hire blacks, my great grandmother would tell her, they ain't gonna hire you. She said, they'll have to tell me. And she'd come back with a job. You hear me? That was my grandmother. My grandmother on her deathbed asked me a question, grandson, do you think black people will ever rule themselves? She didn't just have a key to social change. She had an insight into what true power was, ruling yourself, because she'd been under the rule of white folks forever and wanted out of it. When we had demonstrations in the San Francisco Freedom Movement, she would get out of Miss Ann's kitchen, come and picket, demonstrate, and come to meetings. You hear me? Because she saw a light that may be coming. So this was key to my grandmother. My great grandmother, Sylvia Brown, was the daughter of an enslaved African, and she experienced cruelty at the hands of her own mother. She was a black woman, if you're going to talk about pride, had rimrod straight posture, erect and straight. She was the upholder of moral teachings, as is true in most black families. And she was the dispenser of heavy manners. That's a Caribbean word for getting your butt whipped. And she whipped them. You hear me? Males and females. And my mother really got it because she had a spirit that she didn't particularly like. They had issues, my mother and her. That's a whole nother thing with black women. They got issues, you know what I mean? Real ones. So she was also called a Wampus cat, W-A-M-P-U-S. I was driving on the bridge with my mother a few years before she died. She didn't know what that meant. I said, oh, Mom, that meant she could whip any man's behind, any. In fact, my great aunt would not tell her when she had problems in school because she'd go whip the teacher. That was great grandmother. So she kept the family safe. Not only physically safe, because at that time my grandmother wasn't married, and then another time she would be, but she kept them morally secure, upright in terms of character. She embodied the qualities of Black womanhood. Her voice was a voice of authority in the family. As a teacher of truth and a dispenser of heavy manners, she commanded respect. She didn't have any time for gossip, and she couldn't feign fragility if she wanted to. She didn't have a fragile bone in her body. You hear me? So she was Mississippi tough. And to be tough, Mississippi tough, that's about as tough as you can get. You hear me? So when whites saw her, they stepped aside. Great grandmother. Again, embodying Black womanism. My mother, Sylvia Bradley, resembled Lena Horne, although my wife said she's prettier. You know, they come out of the same phenotype. But I never saw her walking around bragging about how she looked, though she took forever getting ready. She primped to the bone and was never on time for anything. That was my mother. And she had mouth, but she had nothing to back the mouth up with. Too pretty. She wasn't going to have nobody messing her face up. And I know some other women just like that, but I know others who look good or look whatever they look like and will knock you out in a minute. So it depends on the person. And I won't tell you some of the few people that I know right now that have that. They don't want me telling that on TV. But that was my mother. My mother was the dispenser of heavy manners in our family. She had been a straight A student. She's the one that trained us in all of the fine arts, reading, writing, math, and deportment. But my father played the role of nurturer. Now, he's the warrior that take the heads off of anyone that threatened the family. But in the home, he never laid a hand on us. He was the one that would talk to us. So that's another thing about how the masculine feminine principle works in Black families. that clarity on the role of the meaning of manhood and womanhood, but flexibility in the expression of masculine and feminine qualities. So my father was more the nurturer than my mother, but would always reinforce a whipping. You never got any daylight between the two of them, but would never do it himself. You hear me? So my mother, again, showing these royal qualities of Black womanhood, she was called by her friends queen. She carried herself with that dignity, but there's no haughtiness in it. There was no arrogance in it. She had pride, but it was just natural pride embedded in her. When we were in the Bahamas, she had an appreciation of each of her children, the qualities of each. My sister's a poet, a spiritual person. My brother's a family man. Always, he was mama's boy, lived close to her and everything else. So we're in the Bahamas on vacation, and we're going through the marketplace. And so if I ever really wanted a woman to be impressed, I would take her to my mama. I never did that, but if I did, you just hear nothing but praise. You know what I mean? But the key thing about my mother was she appreciated the qualities of each of her children. But this quality she appreciated in me, I appreciated to the highest degree. Because when we're walking through the marketplace, she's not telling the market woman, see my son, he's a professor. See my son, he's got a PhD. I ain't interested in that. She knew what I was interested in. She said, see my son, he's a revolutionary. And I said, go on, Mom. How many mamas appreciate that? How many fathers appreciate that? Some do. My mama did. My mother and father supported me in everything I did in my life. When the COINTELPRO forces attacked me a number of times, one was when 18 tried to kill me in 1966. This finger was broken. I had to lay chairs. It was a bloody mess. And my mother, years later, talking to me like she was my sister or something, because we're adults and we got that kind of conversation. She said, the thing I respected most about you, and this really indicated her deep appreciation of each of her children, in this case, me, she said, the thing I most respected about you was how you handled that. And you got right up and kept on fighting, my mama. Because if they hold the keys to social change, if it's in their family, they're encouraging it. They're giving support for it. They nurtured it in the womb. And so a lot of my Black pride, self-love, and a sense of my purpose to promote social change came from my mother. I want to wrap this up by talking about the last woman that played an important part in my life and is the epitome of social change, of the model for social change, was Ella Hill Hutch. Ella Hill Hutch was the mother of the San Francisco Freedom Movement. She later became the first Black woman elected to the Board of Supervisors. That was not even acknowledged. She died at 59 because she spent all her time supporting Black people. They'd call her in the middle of the night. She was up looking after Black people. She was my mother's best friend. And but for her, I wouldn't probably be the activist that I am. Because of all my mother's children, she saw the potential in each one. And she encouraged me, then Bill Bradley. She said, Bill, you need to go to a C.O.R.E meeting. C.O.R.E what? I didn't know what that was. Congress of Racial Equality. And when I walked through that door, that changed my life. Ella Hill Hutch was the epitome of Black womanhood, never gossiped, had no sense of needing a whole lot of material things, always lived in a 2-room apartment. Even when she's on the Board of Supervisors, could make a lot of money. She wasn't concerned about that. And she was someone who would start a group, San Francisco Freedom Movement, the most successful of the Northern freedom movements, and back off and encourage others to assume leadership. That again is a role that a lot of Black women have played, as they have also played roles in leadership. So she was a sister always with a smile on her face and nothing negative to say about anybody. So to her, I owe my consciousness, because without her, I may never have joined the Black freedom movement. And so to her, I say, thank you, Ella. So in conclusion, the Black woman is a Black man's best friend. Her qualities explain why the race can go as high as it's gone. And it is the manifestation and proof that you measure the level of a people by the level of its women. And so Black femininity is an expression of the divinity that resides inside of each woman and the deep culture that they draw from. Hotep.
Hotep.
Okay. Now, even though I went about 15 or 20 minutes over, that's a short speech for me. Would you agree, Shaka?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I did my best.
But it's all good
Put
stuff.
some gravy on some stuff, so it takes a little longer. Sister Erica,
You're great. I'm good, sir. I'm good. I'm better now after that. Appreciate
you. We give thanks for your message, Baba, and wanted to. I wanted to say out loud because you had spoke to me about that you'd like to have a copy of this recording to be able to upload on your podcast. So a little later on, we'll get that together for you so that you can have a copy of this, and we'll have a copy of this. And I want to encourage everyone again that Dr. Oba T. Shaka has his podcast show on YouTube, and I have subscribed already. Go on there and subscribe and help build the show. And whenever you go on the show, press the like button to help with those algorithms that notify other people eventually and will brings that wisdom home. So all your scholarship and your warriorship is much appreciated, Baba. Wish we had more time with you because we really need to just have a question answer for 1 hour because of what all is inside of you and what all the experiences. And then you just get to go at it and pull from every experience you've had. So we'll have to plan something like that, just a question answer with Dr. Oba T. Shaka.
Indeed.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Hold on, Brother Simon. I just wanted to say to Brother Myro that if I can get Dr. Oba to Shaka's information, I can get him that tape this afternoon.
I'll send over the email. I'll send his email address.
Okay. All right. Because I got to edit it out and just give it to him this afternoon. Okay.
Well, on behalf of the COR and of course our entire spiritual center, Dr. Oba T. Shaka, we greatly appreciate you extending your time and energy to our service and our Mother's Day presentation today. And from one poet to another, thank you so much, Baba.
Yes, my pleasure.
I say.
And I want to also extend my deepest appreciation and love for you, Dr. Tashaka, brother. This was amazing. You talked, when we spoke, you said, I want to start on time and end on time so we can have, the Q&A and have all of the necessary conversation, and then you had something else to do with your queen today as well. So we started on time and you gave us such a full lesson today. So all of the beautiful history and information that you provided to us, and we can just so appreciate that you care enough and support women and the femininity and the strength that we possess. I really do appreciate you for that, because, all the brothers, don't quite know that, but our brothers do, and they're getting there stronger and stronger. So we just appreciate that you have walked that talk and are giving us so much. I'm going to be on your Saturday program more often. Um, and just thank you again. And we'll talk. And I really appreciate you. I want to also say thank you to the brothers for yesterday's dinner, their meal, and all of the planning that has gone into and the success that you've done for this celebration of motherhood and women and femininity. I really do appreciate all the efforts. It was amazing. It was beautiful, creative, the everything that you did. We enjoyed and we appreciate it and we love you. We bless you. We behold the Christ in you. Ashe.
Ashe. Well, you are very welcome. Our pleasure.
All right, Tuahu. Again, do we have any, Simon Mar, Brother Myro, anyone have any closing? Because I know Brother Tashaka has to leave because it's after 1.
I got time if you got any questions.
Okay, all right. Hey, yo, you're getting a blessing. You're getting a blessing here.
Awesome.
Okay, all right. So let's have anyone have any questions?
Okay, I'll start it off and give people time to think. I just want to thank Brother Obadishaka personally and to publicly say thank you more so than anything else for your example that you've been consistently demonstrating since 1960, and that you further demonstrate by allowing us to invade your private time with your queen today. Your example, more than anybody I know, shows us as a people in general, but us as common men in specific, exactly the trajectory we need to be on for the rest of our lives in order to be as righteous as we aim to be. So I appreciate you for that. And if you ever need us, don't be shy. Give us a call. You know how to call me, and we can help you do whatever it is that you feel that we can help you to do. Also, as a question though, in terms of your leadership training, you might want to give us a little bit on that so that we can prepare and participate in that and grow from that.
Yeah, I've created an institute called the P.A.P.O, Cabral, and you see when I was on, you see in the background Amilcar Cabral, the brother with the sunglasses on, Ella Baker Institute. And so P.A.P.O, House of Life, that was the highest university system in ancient Kemet. Ella Baker is one of the two best organizer leaders in the 60s, along with Malcolm X. Her style of leadership is the most appropriate style for today, group-centered leadership, as opposed to being centered on a single person. Black Lives Matter has picked that one up. And Amilcar Cabral is the best thinker, strategist, military leader, organizer, leader in the 20th century. Nobody can touch him. And his country was very small, but his analysis of the social structure of Guinea-Bissau was the best analysis done by any leader or sociologist in the 20th century. And the proof of the pie is in the pudding. When it was put on the ground, it worked. He had the lowest casualty rate in war, killing over 50,000 Portuguese and losing only 2,500 of his own. And we don't know how many Black flunkies who were working for the Portuguese, probably more than 50,000. He considered the loss of more than one life a catastrophe and had no military training, So the Amilcar Cabral, the P.A.P.O House of Life, Amilcar Cabral, Ella Baker Leadership Institute is an adaptation of what was done in Kemet to modern times. And so in the modern era, there are things we have to deal with that Kemet didn't. We have to deal with brainwashing. So, for example, there's a systematic process that my show the Dr. Oba Tashaka show was set up to expose people to. I'm doing this mainly to reach younger people. Anyone that's interested, I'm open to it. But our average viewership goes from 30 on up and some 13 years of age. And we're reaching a broad viewership in Africa, Asia, Europe, with the strongest base in the US. One of the ground bedrock bottom for the show, the Dr. Oba Tashaka show, is the sixfold stages to mental freedom. Those are the stages we go through when we're awakening. I'm an innovator. I've innovated 6 schools of thought, and all of these schools work. The only one that I didn't do on my own was the sixfold stages. A brother named Bulunlela Wabogo. I don't know if any of you know of him. He is a martial artist, a pianist, a jazz pianist, a chemist, and a historian. And I hired him to teach at San Francisco State. He charted the awakening process through Frantz Fanon. I charted it through my own awakening and the awakening of others. And I've taken people through this process of awakening now for 50 years. And so right now we sign people up. When we have 40, we're going to start a webinar that'll be a year-long webinar in the awakening process. People don't know it, but to be a part of it, you're going to have to be involved in some kind of community program. It won't be enough for you to just come in and get some academic stuff, because this doesn't work unless you're applying it to your thoughts, your philosophy, your attitude, your behavior pattern. You got to be doing something to serve your people. So people I've taken through this over the last 50 years will be assisting me. So we'll be breaking people down into groups of 10 and then training them in that. So we've given people some exposure to this, but that's academic. African systems don't work the way Western systems do. And because we're imprisoned in the Western pedagogy, we think that knowing something is sufficient. It's not. You have to know how to be what you know. That's the African system. But we don't have a pedagogy for that. By the way, the book I'm finishing now on Seba, it's at 643 pages. I hope it's finished by the end of this year. It breaks the paradigm for pedagogy. It is a pedagogy that works, a system where to know the truth, you have to be the truth. And it works on 3 levels. One is the classroom, and then many other levels, the community, the church, spiritual institutions, prisons, the person themselves. So that's a teaching method. And then there's the mastery method. John Henry Clarke, who I interviewed for the last 8 months of his life on the masters in his life. I was telling Sister Erica about this, Reverend Erica, that I was interviewing him on the masters in his life. John went through high school. The people who really set him up for having the deep knowledge he had were masters. He apprenticed under them in the same way they did in Africa. He didn't know what the African system was. And in fact, when I delivered the mother principle to him in 1995 in his study, a huge study with 25,000 books, I explained this book to him. And he said, how are you going to explain something so complex like that? Well, my last interview with John Henry Clarke was in 1998 in his home after an ASCAC conference. He was dying then. He was sitting up in his wife's apartment, but he was dozing off, coming back, but his mind was very alert. And it was on the masters in his life. And so the answer, how am I going to explain that? Through masters like you. So this is another piece that we'll be using in leadership training, which is the apprenticeship piece. Because if you're going to be a master, you have to apprentice under masters, directly or indirectly. And one reason why jazz ain't producing as much creativity as it used to be is too dependent on music schools. You got to have masters that you're up under, that you draw from. And you got to be in the real world practicing that. And so that's what this system is. So in terms of the leadership training, the Art of Leadership, Volume 1 and 2 will be used as part of the text, but others as well. we'll be using the show to collect, we are using the show now to collect information. On the 21st of this month, I'll be doing a series on the Black Panther Party. And Minister Emory Douglas, who's Minister of Culture, who I knew before he was in the party, he will be one, and we have others we're bringing on. And there'll be a series of chapters on that. This show is chapters in a book, as Shaka Santori knows, because I'm born in August the 4th, and I'm at the Leo Sagittarius thing, and Louis Armstrong was the same thing, August the 4th. He viewed his music as chapters of playing with a beginning, middle, and end, and that's the way I do my shows, a beginning, middle, and end. So a lot of these shows will be turned into books, written books, you know? So that's also a part of the training. So in the future, like we did a show on, I was telling Sister Erica Mott that we did a show on the best educational movement in the country around African-centered education in Kansas City, Missouri, and interviewed two major leaders in that. One who led the Kansas City chapter of the Black United Front, Ajama Webster, who has a master's in structural engineering and a 5th degree black belt, and a very just nice brother. And he led the best project for community control in public schools, where they taught 1,100 students for 22 years and controlled the budget for that themselves, $9 million a year. They were underfunded, but they made do, because, you know, we do excellent education with no money. So imagine what you do with 9 million, you know what I mean? So that was, and then with Leon Dixon, who leads the major after-school program in the country, W.B. Du Bois Learning Center in Kansas City, 50-year-old project where 200 kids a year are being educated on a volunteer basis by Black professionals who are language arts specialists, chemists, physicists, mathematicians, architects, you name it. And most of these kids end up in college. So that was put on. So as we train people in how to gain control of the schools in your community, we're giving them models. And we've got them committed, Jamu and Leon, to do training on this. So that's part of what this platform is. I'm trying to build the platform so I have a greater group to draw from. I put $28,000 of my own money funding this, but I ain't continuing to do that. I ain't going broke on no show. You know what I mean? Huh? So, you know, we got a little thing of donate, make a donation. It ain't going to me. I ain't no preacher, and I'm not looking for, you know, earning a living on the show. I'm doing this to pass something on to this next generation and to draw on the elders who got something to pass on as well. So that's a part of that whole thing. So we'll be dipping into the per ankh bag more and more as we go on. And then we're available for some kind of training we can do in other ways as well. So I see myself now, I've been an organizer for 63 years. I'm in the training mode. We have a lot of the young people that have picked up, particularly Black Lives Matter, Melina Abdullah, who I'm really proud of. I think she's the best organizer in Black Lives Matter. She was, by the way, a student at Berkeley High when we were sticking what's called Step to College classes at Berkeley High. And I was tight with her friend who was a teacher there, Richard Davies. And so I've let her know I'm real proud of her work. And so that's also what we want to do, intergenerational leadership training.
Anybody else before we close?
Yes, I have a question.
Who is that? Who is that?
My name is Gail, and I was wondering, how do we sign up for some of the programs you speak of, like the comedic leadership or the awakening? Yeah, how do we sign up?
Go to the show, the Dr. Oba Tashaka show. That's the easiest way. Just put Dr. Oba Tashaka show. You'll see it. Click into it. the letters. I don't want to, they're long, but go to the Dr. Obata Shaka show and watch the shows. If you can, come in on the chats, which the shows are normally live at 10 a.m. And the one we do on the 21st will be live. And at that time, we give people information. If you're interested in signing up for the sixfold stages, the transformation process, then what you can do is when you go into any of the pictures of a show, make comments below and put your email address up there. Say you're interested in enrolling in the sixfold stages to mental freedom, and we'll hook you up. Because as soon as we have 40, then we're ready to kick that off. And the same thing with some of the other things we'll be doing. You'll get notice on the shows on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That access is on the in the chat. Gail, his information is in the chat, and everyone.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't see any.
Yeah.
I don't see any other hands. Is there any other hands? Because we're going to close out 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to see some. I can't see where you put the hands. Can you hear me?
Yeah, well, but maybe because do you have your camera on? Who am I speaking to?
His name is Emil.
Brother Anthony.
Anthony, okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to say hotep to all of you all and to the excellent presentation that Dr. Obata Shaka presented. And I also like to say hotep to Brother Mira Haru. I met him in Kemet in 2016. You may not remember, but with the travels with the Sunu Ashra Kwesi. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I met him in 2016. So he may not remember me, but at that point it was good travels with Sunu. I refer to.
Are you able to turn your video on, brother? Are you able to? Or? If not.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. We can see you.
Oh yeah. So I don't know if you remember, brother.
Yeah.
Miro.
Brother Myro.
Brother Myro, I don't know if you remember me, but I just tuned into you all.
Yeah.
And at that 216, the travelers through the Boise had.
Yes, I recognize you now.
Yeah. That was a darn good travel. His travels and his education is always the bomb, you might say. So so I'm looking forward to tuning into you all. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, and I was looking for something that, from a comedic standpoint, from a spiritual, and I just happened to tune into you all. And so I like to get some further information. How you all, do you have your discussions or your teachings every Sunday, or do you have things going on throughout the week? What exactly?
You can keep up. Yes, go ahead. You can keep up, brother, with all of our events and activities. We have a weekly Sunday service, but go to KRSUnityCenter.org. That's KRST Unity Center. KRST Unity Center, all one word, .org.
.org. Check it out. And check it out there. It has a list of events that you all have going and stuff, right?
Yes,
Indeed.
It has all of our classes, all of our upcoming lectures. It has all of our information about the guidelines and stuff here at C.O.R.E if you want to become a member. And we can send you the information. We have Ptah is one of the books that we use here, so we have copies of that in the Hosea. So all of that you can find on the website. All right.
Okay.
And then if you have any other questions, there's contact information.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Wow. Okay, we're gonna close out with our affirmation and then let Baba over to Shaka say one last thing for closing after we give our affirmation, just so that we can close out together today since he's here to the end. So we're gonna take advantage of that. So Brother Ms. S.N.C.C, do you have the affirmation for us today so we can end and then give Baba over to Shaka the closing?
2. All right, our weekly affirmation. Having received love, kindness, nurturance, and compassion, I give thanks to everyone who has inspired me and touched my life.
Yeah.
Sure. So one more time.
Mhm.
Having received love, kindness, nurturance, and compassion, I give thanks to everyone who has inspired me and touched my life. Ashe.
Ashe. So
I
there's,
say.
and as we leave, I'd like to say thank you to the production, the members of the production committee, the technical production committee, who meet every week on Tuesday and Saturday, just to make sure that our platform is strong and that we're meeting the concerns of our community. So dua to all of you this morning for just being here, always showing up. Yeah, Sister Erica and myself could not do it without you. You know that. So we are so appreciative of all of you who stand up every week. And as I said last week, we are going to find a way to give you a weekend off. We are going to make it happen. We are going to make it happen so that you don't have to be here every week, just so you have time for your family and stuff on Sundays. But that's after service, just so you don't have to be at the production meeting so much and be on point. So we'd like to say thank you to the brothers again for this wonderful, wonderful program, to all the COM men and all the COM women in the background that are supporting these wonderful brothers, all of the women who are in your life and the mothers who have raised you and given you the strength and wisdom and guidance that you have needed to become who you are today. We give thanks to that first divine principle of motherhood that gave birth to all of us. We give thanks to the melanin in our skin that we can touch our mothers through it, back to the very beginning, because their DNA runs to the beginning of time. So we give thanks for that principle within each and every one of us. Ashe. So Baba, over to Shaka, over to you for the closing, and we're going to get ready to head for so that everybody can go out and take their mothers and wives and sisters out today. Ashe.
Yeah, to all of the members of C.O.R.E Unity Center of African Spiritual Science and those who are interested, including the brother from Chicago, keep up the good work. You're passing on our traditions in a powerful way, and you have good leadership all around you, including Sister Erica and sister that's working with her. I think it's very good that you got some female leadership in there. That's real good. And just keep up the work of waking our people up. Otep. And Erica, you know I love you. You know that.
Ashe, Ashe, Grass Unity Center of African Spiritual Science.
And you know I love you too. And happy Mother's Day to my sister Pam.
I'll tell her.
All right.
Okay, Brother Diamond, are you going to take us out today? We have something to take us out. Brothers, to the end.